The aroma of roasted bird and something involving butter and brown sugar hung in the air like a fog of contentment. Vesa had been in the Halloran Reyes household for exactly 6 weeks, and she had learned to identify this particular scent as home. It was a word that defied easy translation into her native Skvanari, which was why she had written it down in her personal notes 3 times already, each attempt more unsatisfactory than the last. Her current challenge, however, was not the concept of home. It was the concept of Walt Halloran Reyes, who had just uttered what she was rapidly beginning to recognize as one of the most dangerous phrases in the human lexicon. "Oh, sure," he said, dropping a spoonful of stuffing onto his plate with an unnecessary amount of force, "because that went well last time." Vesa's fork paused mid-ascension. The gravy on her mashed potatoes trembled slightly. She ran the sentence through her internal translation matrix once, then twice. The first pass yielded nothing useful. The second pass produced a result that made her brow ridges contract. There was no possible interpretation of the words "that went well" that corresponded to the actual outcome of the previous attempt at whatever Walt was referencing. She knew this with absolute certainty because she had been present for the previous attempt. It had involved a deep fryer, an extension cord rated for indoor use only, and a quantity of turkey that exceeded both the fryer's capacity and Miles's ability to maintain situational awareness. The kitchen had not gone well. The kitchen had gone spectacularly sideways in a manner that had required the fire department and a brief but intense discussion with the homeowners association about the legality of outdoor frying in residential neighborhoods. Vesa set down her fork and adopted what she had been told was her careful voice. The human had trouble distinguishing between her careful voice and her confused voice and her neutral voice, which she found fascinating from a linguistic standpoint, but slightly frustrating from a practical one. "I do not believe that is accurate," she said, each word selected with surgical precision. "The record indicates the previous attempt resulted in a kitchen fire and Miles requiring medical attention for his eyebrows." She had not meant for it to be funny. The statement was a simple factual correction, a straightforward adjustment of the historical record to reflect what had objectively occurred. By every standard of her people's communication, she had just provided a valuable service to the conversation. The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. That single second stretched into something that felt both infinite and terrifying. Vesa had learned to recognize this particular flavor of silence. It was not the comfortable silence of shared understanding. It was the dangerous silence that preceded something she could not predict. Then Kit, who was 15 and apparently required nothing more than the mild embarrassment of an adult to achieve maximum happiness, laughed so hard he had to put his fork down. The sound was explosive. It was wet and uncontrolled and utterly without dignity. Kit's shoulders shook. His face went red. He had to press both palms flat against the table to keep himself upright, and even then, he nearly slid out of his chair. Dana pressed a napkin to her mouth, but the crinkling around her eyes was unmistakable. She was hiding a smile so wide it had nowhere else to go. Even Miles, whose eyebrows still grew at slightly different angles from the October incident, was grinning. He had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed about it, but the grin was there nonetheless. The evidence was incontrovertible. Walt pointed his own fork at Vesa like a gavel coming down on a verdict. "See? That's the spirit. Kid gets it." Vesa did not get it. She understood that something had happened. She understood that her statement had produced a response that was disproportionate to its content. What she did not understand was why. Her wrist unit was already active. A small hollow display flickered to life on the inside of her forearm, invisible to the humans unless they knew where to look. She typed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced economy. "That went well." Inverted meaning, possible reference to failure. Usage appears to indicate successful completion of something that actually ended poorly. Further study required. Context crucial. Wit, humor, testing response to my presence. She added it to a growing list titled Untranslatable. The list was not organized alphabetically or chronologically. It was organized by level of frustration, and this new entry was rapidly approaching the top of the list. Then she went back to her stuffing. The stuffing was good. Dana had made it with sausage and something that tasted like autumn compressed into grain form, and Vesa had already calculated the precise moment when she would need to ask for the recipe. She had not yet determined how to ask without sounding like she was attempting to catalog the family's culinary secrets for eventual submission to the Skvenari embassy. That had been a problem before. It had resulted in a tense conversation about privacy and data collection that had left her sleeping in the guest room for a week. She was not eager to repeat that experience. Vesa's species had one register for speech, just one, the true one. Skvenari did not have irony in the way humans meant it, and this was not because they lacked humor. Far from it. Skvenari comedy was a rich and vibrant tradition spanning 900 years of recorded history. It involved elaborate wordplay, complex callbacks, and a deep appreciation for the structural absurdities inherent in their own language. What Skvenari humor did not involve was saying the opposite of what you meant and expecting everyone to understand. Vesa had explained this to Miles once in the early days of her placement. She had described the cultural foundation of her people's communication, the way their entire information culture had been built around the assumption that if you said a thing, you meant the thing. A Skvenari who said the opposite of what they meant was flagged in the communal database. Quietly, permanently. Not as a moral failing, but as a practical one. You could not trust their data. You could not rely on their testimony. They were, in the most literal sense, unreliable. Miles had nodded along, asked several insightful questions, and then told her that he absolutely got it. She had believed him. She had recorded his statement as accurate. It had taken her 3 weeks to realize that "I absolutely got it" was another entry on the untranslatable list, and that Miles had understood exactly nothing. Words pointed at truth the way a compass pointed north. This was what she had been taught. This was what she had believed. This was what she was beginning to suspect was a complete and utter fiction when applied to the human species. The exchange program had placed her with the Halloran Reyes household to study something called informal register drift in domestic speech. The official documentation had been dense and academic, and full of jargon that made her cranial ridges itch. She had expected slang, contractions, regional vowel shifts. She had expected to document the linguistic evolution of a species that communicated through sound waves and facial expressions, and the occasional gesture that had been culturally evolved to convey meaning without words. She had not expected an entire second layer of meaning running underneath every sentence like a current under ice. She could see the surface of it. She could watch the way the words moved, the way they seemed to point in one direction while meaning something else entirely. But she could not touch it. Every time she reached for the underlying meaning, it slipped away from her, leaving only the words themselves. The dinner had been Thanksgiving. She had spent the week prior studying human holiday traditions, memorizing the historical significance of the meal, preparing herself for the cultural exchange component of her mission. She had been ready for corn. She had been ready for cranberries. She had been ready for a discussion of gratitude and harvest cycles, and the complicated relationship between early settlers and the indigenous populations of this continent. She had not been ready for the sheer volume of sarcasm that accompanied the passing of the gravy boat. 3 weeks later, the house had strings of colored lights half-strung along the porch railing. Miles had started the job on a Saturday with the kind of enthusiasm that Vesa had learned to recognize as the precursor to eventual abandonment. He had climbed the ladder, unwound the first strand, and then, according to Dana's later summary, remembered he was a coward, and left the ladder out until Kit finished it. The strings blinked erratically now. One whole section was dead, the bulbs dark and cold, because nobody wanted to be the one to climb back up and fix it before company came. The ladder remained where Miles had left it, a silent monument to postponed obligation. Vesa sat on the porch steps that evening, her notebook balanced on her knee, watching Kit wrestle with an extension cord that had apparently decided to become a knot rather than a functional piece of electrical equipment. The air was cold. Her breath made small clouds. She had been taught that this was a sign of imminent hypothermia in humans, but she had also been taught that humans were remarkably resistant to their own biological fragility. She decided to test a theory. "Your father did not complete the lights," she said. Kit grunted. Nope. Is this considered a failure of duty within the household? The teenager snorted. He did not look up from the cord. His fingers were red with cold, and he had jammed a small stick into the knot in an attempt to create leverage. The approach was not working. It's considered a Tuesday, Kit said. Vesa wrote that down too. She transcribed the words with exacting precision, noting the inflection, the timing, the way Kit's shoulders had remained entirely relaxed while delivering a statement that should, by all logical standards, have indicated deep dissatisfaction with his father's work ethic. She was not sure it counted as sarcasm so much as its own dialect entirely. It was something between resignation and acceptance, a linguistic shrug that acknowledged failure without condemning it. It was, she realized, the human equivalent of a statement she had no direct translation for. She closed the notebook for a moment and watched the lights blink their uneven pattern against the dark. One section dead. Nobody fixing it. The family had simply accepted that this was how things were now, that the lights would blink and the world would continue turning, and that some tasks were simply not worth the effort required to complete them. It was not efficiency. It was not laziness. It was something else entirely, something that felt almost like affection. They left the lights broken because they all knew it was broken. They all knew no one was going to fix it. And somehow, that shared knowledge had become a kind of bond. Vesa opened the notebook again and wrote, "Lights broken. Everyone aware. No one acting. Is this community?" She underlined the word community twice. Then she closed the notebook and watched Kit finally wrestle the extension cord into submission, his fingers cold and his expression satisfied, and she thought about the dinner table and the silence and the way Walt's fork had pointed at her like a gavel. She did not understand this family. That was not surprising. She had been here 6 weeks, and she had not expected to understand them yet. What was surprising was how badly she wanted to. The snow came on a Tuesday. Vesa had been warned about the snow. Her orientation packet had been very thorough on the subject of Earth weather patterns, complete with diagrams, historical averages, and a lengthy section on appropriate clothing that she had memorized and then promptly ignored because she was from a world where temperature fluctuations were measured in geological time, not meteorological whims. The packet had described the snow as thin gray slush. The packet had been wrong. This was real snow, the kind that didn't just fall but descended, like the sky had decided to become something else entirely. It turned the yard silent at dusk, muffling every sound until the only thing Vesa could hear was her own breathing and the soft crunch of her boots on the fresh powder. The light was wrong too, blue and strange. Not the blue of her homeworld's twilight, but something deeper. Something that seemed to swallow the edges of things and leave only the shapes. She stood on the porch for a long time that first evening, watching it accumulate. The broken string of lights blinked their uneven pattern against the whiteness, and she found herself counting the gaps. 1 dark bulb, 2 dark bulbs, a section of 8 where nothing glowed at all. She had counted them before. She had counted them every night for 3 weeks, and she had never once mentioned it to the family because she was not sure why she was doing it. She was starting to notice something underneath the log entries she had been keeping. It wasn't the phrases themselves that mattered. It was who they were aimed at. This realization had been building for weeks, accumulating like the snow on the railing, each flake adding to the weight of something she could not quite name. Walt did not say, "Oh sure, real smooth," to the mail carrier. He did not say it to the neighbors. He did not say it to the teenage boy who delivered the mail on Saturdays, or the woman from the homeowners association who left passive-aggressive notes about the lawn. He said it to Miles. He said it to Dana. He said it once, carefully testing the water, to Vesa. The week after Thanksgiving, over leftovers that had been reconstituted into some kind of casserole. Walt had looked at her across the table, and there had been something in his expression that she now recognized as a kind of offering. He had said, "Oh sure, because that went well last time," and he had been aiming it at her. Testing. Seeing if she would catch it. She had not caught it. She had answered him with a literal correction instead of a laugh. She had told him, with all the precision she could muster, that the turkey had been fine and the fire had been contained, and Miles's eyebrows had grown back satisfactorily. She had been helpful. She had been accurate. She had been everything her people valued in a conversational partner. Walt had gone quiet after that, polite, overly correct. The kind of polite that felt like a wall going up, not a door opening. He had treated her the way he treated strangers at the hardware store, the ones who asked for directions to the plumbing aisle and got precise impersonal instructions. Overly kind, overly careful. The kind of kindness that meant nothing because it cost nothing. She had not understood at the time that this was a demotion. It took her until the second week of December to work out the shape of it. She was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of something Dana called hot chocolate, and that Vesa had privately classified as liquid sugar with the texture of regret, when Dana burned a batch of cookies badly enough to set off the smoke detector. The alarm was shrill and panicked, the kind of sound designed to make humans evacuate buildings and then stand around in parking lots looking confused. Vesa had already assessed the situation and determined that the cookies were beyond saving, but the house was not in imminent danger. She was about to say so, to offer this valuable information to the household, when Miles spoke. He did not look up from his phone. He did not even seem to register the alarm. He just said, in a tone so flat it could have been carved from stone, "Well, we always knew you had a gift." Dana threw a dish towel at his head, not hard, aimed to miss. The towel sailed past his ear and landed on the counter, and Dana was already laughing, already shaking her head, already reaching for the smoke detector to silence it. Miles finally looked up from his phone, and there was something in his expression that Vesa had learned to recognize. It was the same thing she saw on Kit's face when he teased his father. The same thing she had seen on Walt's face, that one time, before she had ruined it with accuracy. It was affection. It was the kind of affection that did not need to be stated because it was too big for words. It was the kind of affection that could only be expressed by pretending to be cruel. Vesa watched this happen, and she felt something click into place with the quiet finality of a lock engaging. The insult was not an insult. It was a kind of proof. Proof that Dana was trusted not to be hurt by it. Proof that the family had enough banked warmth to spend some of it carelessly. They did not say cruel-sounding things to people they were not sure of. They said them to the people who would stay anyway. She looked at the dish towel on the counter. She looked at Dana's red face, still flushed from the heat of the oven and the embarrassment of the alarm. She looked at Miles, who was already scrolling through his phone again, secure in the knowledge that he had not actually hurt anyone, and she understood, with a sudden clarity that made her feel like she had been staring at a puzzle and finally seeing the picture, that every time someone had not joked with her, every overly careful, overly literal, overly kind sentence aimed her way for the past 6 weeks had been the true insult. Politeness had been the wall, the careful distance, the way Walt had backed off after she failed his test, the way Dana asked about her day with the same tone she used with the grocery store clerk, the way Miles said please and thank you and would you like as if she were a guest who might leave at any moment. She had been logging the wrong data the entire time. She closed the notebook. She did not open it again. She sat there at the kitchen table, the scent of burnt sugar and failed cookies still hanging in the air, and she watched Dana and Miles bicker about who was going to clean the smoke detector. She watched Kit drift through with a bag of chips and an insult aimed at his father that would have started a war on her homeworld. She did not write any of it down. The snow continued to fall outside. The lights on the porch continued to blink their uneven pattern. And Vesa sat at the table, her notebook closed, her hand resting on the cover, and she understood that some things were not meant for translation. Some things were not meant for files. She thought about Walt's careful kindness. She thought about the way he had retreated from her, the wall he had built with, please and thank you, and I appreciate your input. She thought about how much effort it must have taken him to be that polite to someone who had clearly failed his test. She thought about the dish towel sailing past Miles's head. She thought about how much she wanted to be the one someone threw a dish towel at. The kitchen was loud now, Dana and Miles still arguing about the smoke detector, Kit adding commentary from the doorway, the whole family doing what families did. And Vesa sat in the middle of it, her notebook closed, her data incomplete, and she understood something that no amount of translation could capture. She had been trying to understand the words. She should have been trying to understand the silences. The laughter had been a gift. The teasing had been an invitation. The politeness had been a door closing, and she had not even realized she was on the wrong side of it until she saw the dish towel fly. She did not open her notebook. She did not document the shift in her understanding. She did not add anything to the untranslatable list because she finally understood that the list itself was the problem. You could not translate love into data. You could not file belonging. The cookie smoke was fading. Dana was opening a window. Miles was saying something about ventilation systems and how he could have told her, should have told her, would have told her if she had only asked. Dana was throwing another dish towel. This one actually aimed at his face, and he was ducking and laughing, and Vesa was watching it all with new eyes. She thought about the porch lights, about the broken section that everyone knew was broken and no one had fixed. She thought about how the family walked past those lights every night, seeing the darkness, knowing it was there, and choosing not to fix it, because fixing it would mean climbing the ladder and standing in the cold and admitting that the imperfection mattered more than the effort it would take to remove it. She thought about her own log, about the carefully documented entries, the precise timestamps, the detailed analysis of every interaction. She thought about the file she would eventually submit to the Skvenari embassy, the official report on human communication patterns and the linguistic quirks of one specific family on one specific planet. She thought about lying. She did not know how to lie. Her people did not do it, not in the way humans meant it. But she was starting to understand that there were different kinds of truth, and that some truths were too large for language, and that the most important things she had learned in this house could never be transcribed. She closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to feel the warmth of the kitchen, the chaos of the family, the faint smell of cookies that were beyond saving, and the stronger smell of something that might have been hope. When she opened them again, Kit was looking at her. He did not say anything. He just looked, his expression unreadable, his chips forgotten in his hand. And Vesa looked back, and she did not know what he saw in her face, but she knew what she was trying to project. She was trying to project belonging. She did not know if it worked. She did not know if she was doing it right. She had spent 6 weeks learning the rules of this strange game, and she had only just realized that the rules were not written anywhere, that they existed only in the spaces between words, in the dish towels thrown and the insults exchanged and the lights left broken, because everyone knew and no one cared. She wanted to be part of that. She wanted to be part of the silence. The snow was still falling, the lights were still blinking, and Vesa, for the first time since she arrived, did not reach for her wrist unit. Christmas came and went in a blur of wrapping paper that Kit refused to clean up on principle, and a turkey that Dana overcooked on purpose. She had claimed it was for consistency. The previous year's turkey had been dry, the year before that had been dry, and Dana had apparently decided that tradition was more important than flavor. Vesa had watched her pull the bird from the oven with the expression of a general surveying a battlefield. The skin was brown and crackling. The meat underneath was suspiciously uniform in color. Miles had taken one bite and said, "Yep, that's a Halloran Reyes turkey," in a tone that Vesa was now trained to recognize as affection wrapped in complaint. Kit had eaten 3 helpings of stuffing and declared it a victory. The gift exchange had been chaotic and loud and filled with paper that Vesa had been asked to just throw away, but that Kit had insisted on keeping for reasons. The reasons had never been explained. The paper had remained in a pile by the couch for 4 days until Dana finally gathered it up with a sigh and a comment about the wild animals I live with that made Vesa check for predators in the immediate vicinity. There had been no predators. There had only been family, and now it was New Year's Eve. The house was quieter than Vesa had ever seen it. Not the quiet of tension or conflict, but the quiet of a family that had exhausted itself with celebration and was now simply existing in the same space. A pot of something bubbled on the stove. Vesa had been watching it for the past hour, trying to identify the ingredients through smell alone. She had identified onions, celery, something that might have been ham, and a deep, savory note that she could not place, and that was starting to drive her slightly mad. The dead string of porch lights was still dead. Nobody had fixed them. Nobody had even mentioned fixing them. They had been broken since before Thanksgiving, and they remained broken now. The dark bulbs a silent testament to the family's collective decision that some things were simply not worth the effort. Vesa had walked past them every night for weeks, and she had stopped counting the dead sections somewhere around the second week of December. She had stopped counting a lot of things. The family was scattered around the living room. Kit was sprawled on the floor, his phone glowing in the dim light. His attention apparently divided between the screen and the television where some countdown show was playing at low volume. Miles was in the armchair with a book that he had been pretending to read for the past hour. Dana was at the stove, stirring the pot, occasionally adding pinches of something from a small bowl. Vesa sat on the couch. She was not doing anything. She was not logging anything. She was not taking notes or recording observations or analyzing the family's communication patterns. She was just sitting, her hands in her lap, watching the steam rise from the pot and the snow fall beyond the window. She had not touched her wrist unit in 4 hours. 4 hours. The longest stretch since she arrived. She had not even thought about it until now, and the realization made something shift in her chest. Something that felt almost like panic, except it was too warm for panic. Too settled. She was not working. She was just here. And somehow, impossibly, that was the most human thing she had ever done. The countdown on the television flickered. Someone on the screen was yelling about the new year, about fresh starts and new beginnings, about the infinite potential of the next 12 months. Vesa watched the crowd on screen. She had studied this tradition. She understood the cultural significance. What she did not understand was why it made her feel so empty, but she did understand. She understood it in the same way she understood the broken lights, the overcooked turkey, the wrapping paper Kit refused to clean up. She understood that the emptiness was not a flaw. It was a space waiting to be filled. "You know," Dana said, her voice softer than usual, "there's a tradition. When the countdown hits 0, you're supposed to kiss someone, or hug them, or just wish them well. Depends on the family." Vesa looked at her. Dana was not looking back. She was stirring the pot with her back to the room, but her shoulders were tense in a way that suggested she was waiting for a response, waiting to see if Vesa would accept the invitation. "I have no one to kiss," Vesa said. It was not a complaint. It was a simple statement of fact. On her homeworld, such traditions did not exist. Physical contact was reserved for specific occasions, and none of those occasions involved arbitrary changes in the planetary orbit around its star. Dana laughed. It was a small laugh, barely more than an exhale, but it was real. "You've got 4 people in this room who would hug you if you asked." The words hung in the air between them. Vesa watched them settle, watched them take root in the space around her heart. She did not know how to respond. She did not know if she was supposed to respond. On the television, the countdown reached 10, 9, 8, 7. Kit looked up from his phone. Miles closed his book. Dana turned from the stove, her face soft in the dim light. They were all looking at her, all of them waiting, and Vesa understood, with a clarity that felt almost painful, that this was the same test Walt had given her at Thanksgiving, the same test she had failed. But she had been studying. She had been learning. She had been sitting in this house for weeks, absorbing the language of dish towels and burnt cookies and broken lights, and she had finally started to understand. 5, 4, 3, she stood up. She was not sure why. Her body moved before her mind caught up, and then she was standing in the middle of the room, and Kit was grinning, and Miles was reaching for Dana's hand, and the countdown was hitting 0. And Vesa, for the first time in her life, did not analyze the moment. She did not calculate the optimal response. She did not log the interaction or file it for later review. She just stood there, and she let herself belong. The house cheered. The television cheered. Kit was yelling something about the new year and new beginnings and how this was gonna be the best one yet. Dana was hugging Miles. Miles was pretending not to enjoy it. And Vesa stood in the middle of it all, and she felt the warmth of the room settle around her like a second skin. The broken lights on the porch flickered once. Just once. A brief pulse of light from a section that had been dark for months. Vesa saw it. She was the only one. And she smiled. The year had changed. But some things, she realized, were finally starting to work. Kit was the one who did it. He did it sideways, the way she was starting to understand teenagers did most things. Not looking at her. Flipping through channels on the television with the kind of aimless aggression that suggested he was not actually watching anything. His voice was flat, casual, tossed out like it cost him nothing at all. Nice save on the cookies, by the way. Real subtle, Vesa. The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, not because they were loud, because they were the first thing anyone had said to her in weeks that did not feel like it had been carefully curated for her consumption. She had, in fact, quietly moved the second batch out of the oven 4 minutes before the timer went off. She had done it in silence without drawing attention to herself. She had calculated from the smell, from the subtle shift in the aroma, that Dana's system for judging done ran approximately 90 seconds behind actual combustion. The first batch had been salvageable, but dark. The second batch would have been charcoal. She had told no one. She had assumed no one had noticed. She had been wrong. Her first instinct was old, well-worn, 900 years deep. It was the instinct to correct the record, to establish the facts, to make certain that no one misunderstood the sequence of events. She opened her mouth to say it. I did intervene. Yes. This is accurate. I do not understand what is subtle about it. She caught it. She caught the words before they escaped, caught them and held them and felt them die in her throat. She could taste the correction, bitter and metallic. She could feel the weight of 9 centuries of cultural programming pressing against her tongue, and she understood. With a small lurch somewhere under her ribs, the kind of physical sensation that her people had no word for because they had no need for it, she understood exactly what this was. It was not politeness. It was not the careful, distant kindness of the first 2 weeks. It was not the wall Walt had built after she failed his test. Kit had aimed something crooked at her and left it there to see what she would do with it, the same way he did with his father. The same way Walt had once done with her before she had flinched and made him stop. It was a test. But it was also an invitation, the cruelest, most human kind of invitation she had ever received. She set down her spoon. The spoon clinked against the counter. A small sound, barely audible over the television and the bubbling of the pot on the stove. But it felt loud in her ears. Loud like the silence at Thanksgiving had been loud. Loud like the sound of a door opening when you had been standing on the wrong side of it for weeks. She kept her voice as flat and dry as she could manage, which was not very. She could feel the stiffness in her delivery, the mechanical quality that her people had perfected over centuries of precise communication. Yes, because burnt cookies are famously my area of expertise. I trained for this specifically. The words came out wrong. She could hear it. The rhythm was off. The delivery was half a beat too slow. It was the kind of joke a native speaker would clock instantly as learned rather than natural. The inflection was not quite right. The timing was off by milliseconds. She had studied human comedy. She had analyzed the structure of sarcasm. She had logged dozens of examples of successful human humor. She was not a native speaker. She would never be a native speaker. But there was a beat. 1 full second. The same length as the silence at Thanksgiving. The same weight. And then Kit barked out a laugh. It was not a polite laugh. It was not the kind of laugh people produce to spare your feelings. It was surprised, explosive, the kind he did not fake. His face split into a grin that was too wide to be manufactured. His shoulders shook. He actually had to put down the remote because his hands were unsteady. Dana looked up from the stove. Her eyebrows were raised. There was something in her expression that Vesa could not read, something that looked almost like hope. Walt was in the doorway. He must have been standing there for a while, watching. Vesa had not noticed him. She had not noticed anything except the weight of Kit's words and the impossible leap she had just taken. "Atta girl," Walt said. It was the first thing he had said to her without careful edges in almost 7 weeks. "No, please, no thank you. No, I appreciate your input. Just add a girl. The kind of thing he said to his own children. The kind of thing he said to people who had passed a test she had not known she was taking. It landed wrong. She could feel it. The rhythm was off. The delivery was wrong. She had not nailed it. She had not even come close. But Walt was looking at her differently. Dana was smiling. Kit was still laughing, the sound fading into something softer, something that felt like acceptance. She wrote none of this in her notebook. She did not reach for her wrist unit. She did not log the interaction or file it for later analysis. She did not even think about documenting it until later, when she would realize that this was the first time she had ever had a meaningful conversation without recording it. She understood finally that there was no entry that would fit it, no category, no filing system. Some things could not be translated because they were not meant to be. Some things existed only in the moment they happened, and trying to preserve them was like trying to preserve the snow. It had not needed to land right. It had only needed to land like she meant to stay. She looked at Kit. She looked at Walt in the doorway. She looked at Dana, who was stirring the pot and pretending not to watch. And she felt something shift in her chest. Something that felt almost like gratitude, except it was too heavy for that word. Something that felt almost like hope, except it was too steady for that word. She meant to stay. She had not known it until this moment. She had been telling herself she was here to study. She had been telling herself she was here to observe. She had been telling herself she was an outsider, a researcher, a neutral party collecting data on a fascinating species. But she was not neutral anymore. She had saved the cookies. She had done it quietly, without thinking, without calculating the optimal outcome. She had done it because Dana was nice to her, and she wanted to be nice back. She had done it because she was starting to care, and now Kit had noticed. And Walt had said, "Atta girl." And Vesa was standing in the kitchen of a family that was not hers, on a planet that was not hers. And she was smiling. She was smiling. She had not smiled like this in years. Not the tight, controlled smile of diplomatic functions. Not the careful smile of first contact protocols. A real smile. The kind that was not about accuracy or precision or the correct emotional response. The kind that happened when you meant to stay. On the television, some channel was playing a rerun of a show she had never watched. Kit was flipping through again, bored now, the moment already fading into the background noise of the household. Dana was humming something under her breath. Walt had disappeared back into the hallway, and Vesa picked up her spoon. She did not write anything down. She did not analyze the interaction or categorize the responses. She just stood there in the warm kitchen, surrounded by a family that was slowly becoming her own, and she let herself feel it. The rhythm had been off. The delivery had been wrong, but the meaning had been clear. She was staying.